Good morning, everybody. I'm Hunter with Alpha Diver. We are a insights and strategy consultancy that uses neuroscience to dig deeply into the whys of consumer behavior. And what I'm going to talk about today is some of the whys behind digital media behavior, and specifically what actually pushes and compels people into purchase behavior, and some of the ways that we see from a human understanding perspective to better meet people in the marketplace. I said we use neuroscience to understand consumer behavior. It's kind of a $10 way of saying we're measuring the deep causation of consumer behavior from a psychological perspective at scale, at a quantitative level. So I'm going to share some data today from this measure that we call the OmniPulse. It's a proprietary neuroscience-based study. If you look to the right side of this slide, essentially what we're doing is having people reflect on different frames. So we'll say, thinking about your daily life, rank these, and these being those word clouds. You see the person would interact with these really unique survey activities, which basically gives us this deep understanding of what's really driving them between the ears. So today's data, we do work globally. Today's data are US based from our US database, which is analyzed and maintained by our team of PhD neuroscientists. So with all of that context, here's the big question that we all ponder, right? I mean, human beings, consumers, we're inundated with content, with stimuli, online and off, every day. And I think it's safe to say most people in this room are interested in understanding how we can stand out from that noise. How can we capture and earn those precious, fleeting moments of attention, and not just attention, but create intent, actually translate it into purchase behavior. So this is kind of where most digital media discussions begin and end. Where are they? Where are the eyeballs? Certainly that's important, but there's this kind of tacit assumption that if they're there, we can influence them. And, call it the behavior equation from a neuroscientific, psychological perspective. There are two other really important pillars that we need to be aware of. So certainly they have to be there. But second, what are they attached to? There's a lot of things that people do that either they don't like or they could easily give up. And that links really directly to the cognitive processes that translate into behavior. So they have to be there, they have to be attached to it. And last, but certainly not least, it has to align with their buying psychology. Their mindset on a given social platform has to align with their mindset relative to the category that you're interested in marketing and communicating. So looking at, the kind of standard, any social media platform, there's three examples at the bottom. From a neuroscience standpoint, there are four predictable, durable drivers of behavior. There are four reasons that people might do something. And it plays out in social media feeds. Look at your own feed, look at your own behavior. There are four reasons that somebody might go on a platform and interact. To learn, to get recipes, to gather new information, to connect, which is the ostensible purpose of social media, to further cement bonds with our social tribes, to explore, to watch fail videos and take a little mental vacation and discover new things. And anybody have a guess on the fourth one? To brag, to show off, to conspicuously consume. So you look through your media of choice, and you'll find these four present, and it gives you a nice model to sort of diagnose who's doing what. And just as there are these predictable reasons that people interact with the media that we all manage and maintain, there are these drivers and barriers of consumer behavior. So this is a core measure from our database that I mentioned. Just to orient you, the top half is, as it says, drivers. The bottom half is barriers. This is what's driving and hindering young consumers in their daily life. So this is 18 to 25-year-olds, as I said, in the U.S. Of course, we measure all the people, but for today's purposes, and a lot of the questions we get are, young consumers. And you can see there's some interesting things going on. Anything outside that 100 ring is an over-index. And you can see it's pushing really far to the right. And what this tells us about consumer psychology is that the strongest over-index is this driver, to put it colloquially, do what feels good in the moment. It's the most impulsive driver. It's the most follow the gut. And that's followed by discovering new experiences. What we're not seeing, what we're seeing under index, and this has been, this shift has continued over the past couple years as we've looked at longitudinal data, social bonding and more practical factors like managing budget are under indexing. They're driving people's behavior less. And when we look at the barrier side, look at low prices. It's like a dramatic under index. Rarely, it's not to say people aren't concerned about inflationary pricing pressure, but it's to say it's what's hindering them the least. What's hindering them the most is avoiding mental work, inconvenience, followed by fear of social judgment and saving time. So around this wheel are the 9 factors that underlie behavior. This is what we're measuring. And what this tells us, this push to the right, it's the strongest system one. It's the most subconscious. It's the most emotional. And CEOs are constantly asking us, well, when will people trade down? How will people react to inflationary pricing? What this tells us is, and what it demonstrates, is that it's a really emotional reaction. I mean, when you think about when something bad happens in your life, you don't rush to a spreadsheet and start crunching the numbers. You have an emotional reaction. You lose sleep. You blow it out of proportion. The more pressure consumers feel, in this case 18 to 25-year-olds, the more emotional it is. And this morning it was referenced, that history has demonstrated some brands will win and some brands will lose within inflationary pricing. The brands that win are going to remember this and recognize this big insight that I think we all know, but when we start talking about pricing and margin and go to market and activation, we forget. And it's that they're not buying products or subscribing to platforms, et cetera. They're buying a bit of relief. So, there's been all this discussion around inflation fatigue. All the pressures that maintain over the past several years are fatiguing people. I'm sort of channeling 18 to 25-year-olds here. We're sick of it. We don't want to deal with this. We just want to do what feels good and not have to think too hard about it. Now, of course, we have resource constraints. I mean, there's practical goings on of daily life. But what people want in their heart of hearts, what's driving them between the ears is, I just want to do what feels good in the moment and not have to think about it in order to buy a little bit of relief via either digital interactions or actual CPG products, things like that. Okay, so digging into the media measure here. So, I mentioned the psychology and I mentioned that behavior equation. What is it that drives people? This is, again, that 18 to 25. This is where they are. This is the first leg of the stool. You can see this is it's 100. This is the percent of 18 to 25-year-olds that are engaged with. I'm going to show some social media platforms around this. Any guesses where the needle, the compass needle, is pointing up? The highest engagement. TikTok, close. So it's actually YouTube for 18 to 25. Followed pretty closely by Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok. Not huge differences, but as I said, this is often where we begin and end. So if you looked at this, you'd go, okay, well, if we had $1 to spend, 78% are on YouTube, 74% are on Instagram and followed by Snapchat. So you kind of go, all right, I guess YouTube's where we get them. But remember, there's more layers to this. There's more layers in understanding actual behavior. So the second one, this is what we call psychological attachment. It's how important it is to them. And look at Snapchat. It pins the needle. So what this is saying is while there's slightly fewer 18 to 25-year-olds engaged with Snapchat, the ones that are there are super into it. It would be almost impossible to give up. It would be the last thing they'd stop doing from a digital interaction standpoint. So that starts to kind of go, that's interesting. So Snapchat actually has a feather in its cap towards more behavior driving. Then we add the third layer of the psychological alignment. And this is the degree to which these respondents, these consumers, align or perceive these platforms to serve that psychology that I described. I just want to do what feels good in the moment and not think about it. And you can see nothing, actually, Pinterest has an interesting kind of bump out. I mean, there's a lot we can discuss on this table. But when you start to line these three things up, you go, well, Snapchat actually looks pretty interesting. There's a pretty good amount of them there. They're super attached to it, which is really important in terms of translating to actual behavior. And it aligns pretty well with their psychology. So that gives you, this kind of, this better diagnostic and this deeper understanding of, well, it's not just where they are, it's what will drive their behavior. And that also gives us, once we understand their psychology, it gives us this, basically like a guide, kind of a anatomy of great Snapchat content. Chris gave a lot of great examples of all the different content sources and providers and things out there. And so this kind of says, all right, well, we're there. We know they're gettable. We know they're influenceable. This very impulsive mindset that they have, how can we create our content? How can we be in front of the right people, young consumers, in the right place at the right time with the right content? It's like the existential question. And so this says, the checklist is let them discover something new. We talked about discovery that they can get social credit for. So that's really important when you're thinking about things like content creators. Don't forget that your user wants to get credit. The user in this mindset. This is not universal. There are profiles, there are psychological profiles that differ from this, but for this audience, that they can get social credit for in a really high sensory forward way. Their brains, as I said, it's this really impulsive. It's like a toddler in the mall. I want that. I want that. I want that. That's how their brain is wired. So you've got to jump in front of them in a really high sensory way, as close as possible to purchase. So again, that impulsive mindset makes decisions very late in the journey. So something you said to me 2 days ago doesn't really matter when I'm in the actual buying moment. So I'm not trying to disparage any brands or critique unnecessarily, but these are some Snapchat feeds from one of our younger team members. She's close to this age cohort from last week, and it just kind of gives a couple of examples, some reps to say, all right, well, if we apply this checklist, how can we start to assess these and sort of evaluate their impact that they'll have? So this is obviously Grubhub for pizza night. Is it really helping the user discover something new? Not really. I mean, it's like pepperoni pizza. It's like, I know what that is. So there's probably opportunity with discovery. Is it something to get social credit? It appears there's a person kind of presenting this pizza, but they're not getting credit for it. So that's a little bit of a misalignment. High sensory. I mean, this is pizza. It's hard to mess up, but you look at this and you're kind of like, it doesn't look that great. I mean, steam and cheese pulls and really high sensory stuff is what will make this brain, this mindset, when on Snapchat, go, hey, what is that? I want that. And lastly, close to purchase. You can see this was served at $154 for pizza night. That's a miss. I mean, this mindset is like, hey, what do I want right now? It sort of has missed on the first three content from the content perspective, and it should be at 5:54 p.m. right there where she could have gone, oh yes, I'll take that. This is one for Tazo Tea. This one's interesting to me. It's talking about regenerative blends. Regenerative is a big trend, I think probably many know, in food and beverage. And this one struck me because they talk about meet our new regenerative blends, agricultural practices. That's something we'd all find ourselves doing, saying like, hey, this is really good for the planet. It's really cool. This one, we find this a lot with this mindset that if you pivot it towards letting them discover, so instead of like, these are new teas that are regenerative, it's discover what regenerative tea tastes like. It makes like double-digit increases in terms of the stickiness, the impact. So they can kind of pivot the good for the planet into something to discover and even more get social credit for. They're doing some smart things with sensory. There's a lot of heuristics involved with this that I'll resist diving into, but the depth of field, the leaves, they're doing a lot of things right. Things like that steam on the far right one, the tea kind of splashing out, those are really impactful high sensory things. The hot tea splashing out is almost scary. When your content's like a little bit scary, the brain zeroes in on it. So they're doing a lot of things right here, and they could put more topspin on it. Then they've got a call to action where they're actually trying to drive lead gen, and from a DTC perspective, they're trying to say, look, the purpose here is you buy this now. So this one gets a little closer. This one was really interesting to me because it's for produce. So this is a piece of Kroger content for, the lowly category, like what 18 to 25-year-old cares about produce shopping, but they're actually doing some pretty cool things. So, they talk about which produce fits your vibe today. You can see it features spicy New Mexico hatch chilies. It's actually introducing some discovery into this space. I don't know how this program works specifically, but, to the degree you can share these filters and share the content that you've sort of self-curated, that's got impact. And the high sensory, I talked about the tea, the cheese pull, all the things we can talk about the product. But there's nothing that we humans love more than looking at ourselves. Go through your LinkedIn feed. Anything where someone quotes you, you're like, oh, all you want to see is what people said about what you wrote. It's likewise in these platforms. So you can work really hard to make your product look super great, but just that's where filters are so sticky, because it's like we love looking at ourselves, to put it in lay terms. That's a super high sensory trigger. And close to purchase, I mean, I don't know how this then filters into like a basket build or something like that, but they've got a kind of a gamified element. Give it a spin below. They're taking something really lame and making it actually from a behavior influence standpoint, actually really interesting. So this is kind of the takeaway slide. You know, I'm not saying Snapchat's the only medium for 18 to 25. Certainly not. There's lots of interesting stuff going on here. But look, if you had $1 to spend and you had to go brief your teams this afternoon, Snapchat looks pretty strong for 18 to 25s. In general, it can differ by specific product categories, but in their general daily life. And then there's this kind of anatomy of successful content that will connect and stand out. I share a lot of stuff from our database on LinkedIn, so if you're interested, follow me and connect with me there. That's probably the best place. And then I do maintain an email address, and I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has them. And I think Chris is gonna, I think we're gonna have some conversation from here, right? Chris will ask questions on behalf of the group.
Can you folks hear me? Is my, I'm working? All right. So good to see you again, my friend.
Absolutely.
What I took out of what you said is behavior is not a function of who a person is, nor why they do what they do.
Yeah.
And that we conflate those two things together.
Yeah.
So what's the biggest misperception regarding understanding consumer behavior?
Yeah. Well, as our principal neuroscientist, his name's Siggy Hale, as he puts it, people look a lot more similar than we do different. And our behavior looks a lot more similar than it does different. So going on Instagram versus going on Facebook versus going on Snapchat looks pretty similar. I mean, it all looks like this. Like it's all kind of the same thing. The difference, the kind of yards and inches of why is between the ears. It's in our psychology. And we humans are not able to access our subconscious psychology. So to ask somebody, no matter how many times you ask, no matter how much you observe them, why do you engage with Instagram versus Facebook? How likely is that to make you buy the product that was advertised or that was featured in content? We're incapable. We humans are incapable.
So what's an example of that? We talked about one yesterday. I revealed one myself that was slightly embarrassing about how
I'll leave that to you to
bring
share
what
with the
goods
group.
I bring to a party when I'm entertaining at home.
Yeah.
It's not about making them feel good. It's about making me look bougier.
Yeah.
But tell me what.
You're on. It's so we did a project with a gigantic food and beverage portfolio, I'll say, and essentially, all the beer and soda and chips get eaten at parties, whether big summer parties or like cookouts and stuff like that. They had been doing research for decades, as they would, on why do you pick one or the other, but the categories were totally flat. Nobody was pulling ahead. Nobody was really driving any different behavior. And Walmart and retailers were like, hey, we're starting to lose volume to like pizza and Uber Eats and stuff like that. Like, what are you going to do about it? So the long and short of it is they had heard from all the traditional research, why do you buy what you buy for a party? And everyone said what they thought they thought. I buy things that I think my guests will like, that will please everybody. I want to make sure everybody has what they want, and that will be a successful party. And all the activation went to that. What we found is it was actually much more personal. It actually, and this is a good example of the inches between the ears. It wasn't about the guests. It was about them. It was much more introspective. It was much more on that emotional side. You may remember I talked about like social bonding and social validation. It was actually much more about them and expressing their unique personality via their choices in a way that everybody would kind of reward them for. So it was a slight pivot on the creative content. But then we found those alignments that like, okay, well, here's where they're influenceable. Here's where in the path to purchase you should be talking about it. Here's the media, lining those things up like I talked about. And next, it was summer, so quarter to quarter, next quarter, it drove like 10% quarter over quarter
Interesting.
growth. So it was like this huge unlock. It was this little tweak.
I'd like to thank you again for being here, sir. I appreciate it very
Absolutely.
much. Really
I enjoyed
interesting
it.
stuff.